About mid-January, I took 15 grams, roughly 2 caps about an hour between, of Amanita Muscaria one Friday night. Not only did I take 15 grams, but I stupidly ate a grapefruit about 15 minutes beforehand because I had read that it potentiates the strength of many substances. The following experience certainly indicates that it does. After I ate the second cap, my wife, my sitter, got a phone call and said that she had to give a friend a ride, knowing that I would be in no condition to socialize. I told her okay, and that I would call her if I felt it was getting uncontrollable. I was at about a +2 when she left, around 11 p.m. I started brainstorming ideas for an art project that was to be due at the end of the semester, my original reason for dosing. About an hour passed, and it was becoming increasingly hard for me to focus, so I called my wife and told her that she better come back. I found that not only was I not having the luck of grasping at creative ideas that I hoped for, but that I was also getting lost in my own thoughts and losing contact with my environment. I put on South Park, by this time at +3, thinking that the show's cheeriness would at least keep me in a good place. Unfortunately, I didn't realize that I was putting on the Tooth Fairy episode where Kyle is stuck in a metaphysical conundrum and is questioning his very existence. This show was to foreshadow my own condition later that night. Communication was impossible by the time my wife got back. I was having so much trouble holding on to whom I was and where I was that trying to speak anything more than what amounted to indecipherable verbal noise was impossible. It is safe to say that I was scared by this time. Had I not previously read that death from Amanita Muscaria is almost unheard of, it would have been much worse. I found it increasingly hard to remind myself of this though as it went along, because my mind was racing so fast that I was unable to grasp at anything. To call it information overload would be an understatement. These thoughts were only perceptible as a sound repeating and speeding up. Up to this point, I was becoming more and more perceptive to a sound, although I wasn't aware of it in the beginning. It started out like a heartbeat, maybe it was. Slow, normal, and imperceptible at the beginning of the night. But as the night went along, and I was losing my grip on normal reality, the beats blended together and became a constant buzz. Somewhere around this time, I must have passed out. I came to briefly in a different room, our bedroom, and I could feel the presence of another being that was in my head, and I could feel it quickly taking over, and I knew I had maybe 10 seconds before I was gone. It felt as though I was being shot into space at a rapid speed, and I quickly got up and ran to my wife who was watching TV in the living room and repeating over and over, I'm okay, I'm going to be okay, don't worry about me." The next part is beyond description and the most terrified that I have ever been in my life. I think I know now what people mean when they describe the void, because that's all there was. It was like my whole previous life, with everyone and everything in it, had been one long dream, and that I had woken up in the void where nothing existed, had ever existed, or would exist in the future. Nothing is more terrifying or crazy like a mind that has not only been cut off from everything else, but also realizes that they never existed and were only a dream. Time stretched off so far into the future that it no longer existed. Past, present, and futures were one. I pleaded to no one for death at this point, but being alone and immortal, there was no escape. I longed for the dream to begin again. Maybe that's why God, or the Tao, or whatever, first created life and the wheel of time that governs it, so as to escape its lonely prison. This seemed by far the longest portion of the experience, although I have no way of knowing how long it actually was. The length of the earlier part of the experience isn't even comparable. I woke up at this point, or maybe my lonely, immortal self started dreaming again, Saturday morning in a hospital bed with my wife on my left side and my mother on my right hooked up to an IV. When I asked my wife what had happened, this was her story. Apparently she had asked if I was okay and if she could go to bed, and I said, okay. She then asked if she could turn the light off, and I said, okay, again. She awoke 10 to 15 minutes later to a gurgling sound coming from the other room. She found me convulsing on the floor. I had pissed myself at least once, and my eyes were wide open, but rolled back in my head. She tried to wake me, but I was non-responsive to her repeated attempts. Desperate, she called the hospital and had them send an ambulance, who in turn called the fucking cops like most stupid hospitals do in the event of an OD. How can this be justified when this only results in more deaths from ODs when people avoid medical attention for fear of the police? The ambulance came, and the cops shortly thereafter. I'm sure that I would have been okay had I been left alone and $4,000 richer, but my wife did what she thought was right at a time that required a quick decision. I probably would have done the same thing if the roles were reversed. The moral of this story is that not only should you know your drug, but your sitter should know it inside and out as well. Any sitter will not do. It's now 2 months later, and I'm also being charged with possession of a Schedule I substance, DMT, which I think they must have found in some Amanita calabrina seeds that I had, but it seems like a slight stretch to prosecute someone for seeds of a plant that isn't even scheduled. Again, just be careful about what substances you use, and what foods and drugs you take with them. It was the summer after my senior year. All I wanted to do was party. During senior year, I had tried cocaine and ended up with a small habit. However, it wasn't terribly hard to kick, mostly because I lacked the funding to continue doing it and I couldn't bring myself to steal or any of the like to fund my bad habits. Cocaine was my drug of choice, but now that I'd quit, I didn't really want to take the risk of doing it again and letting it come back as more than a habit. Aside from blow, I've smoked marijuana countless times and tripped on shrooms twice, and I've decided that neither of the drugs were for me. 2 days after school got out, I was talking to my girlfriend about what she wanted to do that night, and explaining to her that I was feeling tempted to pick up an 8-ball, but really wanted to try to avoid coke for as long as I could this summer. She suggested I talk to her friend about finding some speed. I'd heard it was similar in effects to coke, but much cheaper. I'd never really thought about trying it though. So anyways, later that night, I called up my girlfriend who we'll call A's friend. A's friend Jen said her boyfriend would run over to get a gram bag of speed ASAP. Sure enough, about 5 minutes later, I had my bag of a white crystally powder sitting in my hand. Neither A nor I had done speed before, so I figured we would start off slow, just a bump off of my key. Recalling how pleasant it was to snort coke, I was unprepared for the burn to come. However, after about 30 seconds, the burn went away, and I felt great. It was my first time with blow all over again. A did 2 bumps, then I did 2 more. It was now about 8 p.m., and since it was summertime, the sun was just starting to set, so I suggested we take a little drive and go watch the sunset. My car flew, and I was able to dodge and avoid traffic like never before. I drove in a way I wouldn't have sober. Be careful, just because you feel like you have superpowers doesn't mean you really do. Anyways, we came to our spot and watched the sunset. We did 1 more bump each just to get back up a little before we hit up my friend Jay's party. It wasn't exactly a rager, but I knew everyone there, and at about 10, A and I decided we'd go do a bunch more speed to get the night started. We did 4 bumps each this time. Upon walking back out to the party, I was the highest I've ever been. I noticed, however, that I still had this urge in the back of my mind to go do more. Fearing that I would if I had the bag, I asked A to hold it for me. She took it and asked if I minded if she took a little more out when she felt like she was starting to come down. Not thinking, I gave her the okay and said something along the lines of, "Sure, do whatever you want with it." While her and a couple of her girlfriends did most of what was left in the bag, only saving the last 3 or 4 bumps for me, knowing I'd be pissed if they polished off all of it. About 2/3 of the way through the night, I was holding A and noticed she was shaking a little. She said she was fine, but I could tell something was wrong. Well, after about 5 minutes it went away, and she was back up bouncing around the room. I, however, was growing tired, and she saw this and asked me if I wanted the rest of the speed. I of course took it readily. It was about 1 a.m. now. I wanted to get the most out of the speed I had left, so I borrowed a crack pipe that my friend Jay kept around for kicks and freebased about 2 bumps worth. Of course, since I was doing it, A wanted to do it also. Apparently earlier, when her and her girlfriends did a large amount of what was in the bag, it was mostly her and not her girlfriends. I, however, was unaware of this small detail. She smoked about a bump worth, and I smoked the last of it. I was feeling great, and so was she, so we headed back to my house, which was only a few minutes away, to go be with just each other for a while. When we got back, I saw my older brother had some friends over, and we sat down on the couch to talk with them before heading back to my room. When A sat down on me, I noticed she was shaking again. As I paid closer attention, I noticed her breathing was extremely shallow. I asked her what was wrong, already having a pretty good idea, and of course, she said nothing. I grabbed her wrist, and her pulse felt high, although I really couldn't tell. It must have just been the speed making me think that. Her breathing worsened, and now she couldn't stop shaking. She was sweating, but she said she was cold. So I wrapped her in a blanket, carried her out to the car, and got to the hospital as fast as I could drive. For these few minutes, my mind almost completely shut off. I was so fucking worried and scared that I was getting intense adrenaline rushes, and they basically put my mind and body on overdrive, and I lost all control. I barely remember what happened. The next thing I knew, I was in the ER with her shaking horribly in the chair next to me. I didn't pass out, but the experience was just very much too intense, and I couldn't handle all of the action and the speed. No one was coming to treat her, so I stood up and started bothering the lady at the window. I was worried we wouldn't get in soon enough, but then 2 paramedics came out with the stretcher to take her back. When the doctor came into the room, he asked me to leave, and then when I said no, he told me to leave, so I went back out to the waiting room. I don't remember too much about this, other than time was moving so incredibly slowly. Why can't they work faster? Damn it, I want to go back in there. So I made my way back into the room and saw A was hooked up to an IV and an oxygen mask. This sight overwhelmed me and scared me. The doctor started to talk to me, but I couldn't understand a word she was saying. This got my nerves going even more. Then the tunnel vision started, and my heart started to beat extremely fast. My pulse pounding rapidly all through my body, and especially my head, is the last thing that I can remember. About 2 hours later, I woke up in a hospital bed in the room next to A. I had a mild heart attack because of all the stress and the speed. Alone, I'm sure I would have been fine, but combined with all the stress, my healthy able-bodied self had a heart attack. Since this experience, I have avoided uppers completely. Just a little background on myself. I'm currently 18 and was 18 at the time of the experience. I'm in no way overweight. As a matter of fact, I run the 400 in track, as well as working out with weights. After I woke up from the heart attack, I didn't sleep for an entire day. If you're enjoying this video so far, please give it a like and subscribe if you're new here. Also, was there a time where you landed in the hospital from a drug? Let me know in the comments, and I'm also glad that you're alive. Alright, let's move on to the next story. Background. I am 16 years old. I have experienced a few drugs. I've tried marijuana, mushrooms, synthetic spice, LSD, although never well, bath salts, alcohol, painkillers, and DXM. At the time of the experience, I thought to myself to be an experienced psychonaut. Mindset and setting. I was excited and in a good mood before taking it. I was at one of my friend's house who I've tripped, smoked, and drank at quite often. It was a rather comfortable environment for me. 2 other friends would be joining me, A being the person who brought it, and B being the other person taking it, 2 others taking DXM, C and D, and another being the sober trip sitter for us all, E, although this was his first time trip sitting alone. So to start us off, I'll get this point out of the way. I thought I would be taking LSD. That was one of my main reasons for being so excited and hearing so many good things about this from others, believed it to be legit. As it turns out, it was a relatively new substance called 25I. I had heard of it and knew about it, and if this is what I knew I was taking, I would have backed out on this one. This night is hard for me to relive. It was a very negative trip. I want this report out there so that anyone considering it will see something besides, I love it, or greatest trip ever. So with that being said, I'll start the trip report. We had all been waiting around for a while. C, being a fellow psychonaut, wanted to partake, but didn't have the cash to, so he decided to bring his DXM that he had left over from another trip. C and D both took the DXM about an hour before A arrived. A was not welcomed at this house due to the parents not liking him, so he snuck through the window. This was at maybe 11:45. We all talked and were excited. Those of us taking it dosed at 11:55. I took 2 hits along with A, and B took 1. After about 10 minutes with the hit still in my mouth, I decided to get everyone to meditate. I had an actual connection with someone across the world, not induced by the drug, which surprised me because it usually happens when I'm alone. After 10 minutes I start feeling it and get really giddy, so I break up the meditation. I left twice to go to the bathroom in the next 5 minutes, and that's the last true memory I have, besides A saying, I think you should know, people have had seizures from this and died. Everything else is very distorted. From those around me, I started acting funny, then just stopped talking. They noticed after 5 minutes and asked my name. I responded by saying E's last name in a funny voice, which was an inside joke I usually say during class. Then they asked me to spell my name. I responded by stressfully saying LSD. They were starting to get worried at this point. They splashed me with water to try to get me to snap back into it, but it didn't work. I then started hitting my head on the wall, which woke up B's parents. His dad came into the room and asked what was going on, and when he found out, they took me downstairs. They then called 911 and had me rushed to the emergency room around maybe 2 o'clock. After about 3 hours, I started coming down, and things started making sense. I was released around 8 a.m. From my perspective, this is a very, very messed up trip to me. I want people to know just how messed up this stuff can make you, so let's start. After returning back from the bathroom, I went to the playroom and stood in the corner, and then was like, C's looking at me funny. Everyone else was like, calm down and sit down, so I listened. I was now back on B's bed, which was where I started out. Then the room darkened, and A turned to me with an evil grin, and nothing but his face lighted and issued the words. His sentence is, 25I. At this point, I was truly scared. Then, everyone started throwing wolf's blood onto me. I was soaked and embarrassed. I then grabbed control of the situation, and then, B and I were alone and being weird tripping, but we were like half boy, half girl people, and acting weird with our little dogs and gossiping about our lives which were limited to that one room. Then, I unzipped his body and found it was me. I did this to another every 5 minutes. I was then surrounded by myself. Then I was carried like a king down the stairs, but was brought to a wasteland version of his living room. I just chilled there, then walked through the wasteland. I was then stopped by a weird mutated freak wolf mixed with a German shepherd, and my blood started spurting everywhere. Those around me, everyone mentioned, and B's parents, were saying you should have stayed. Then a huge bald black police officer got in my face with a flashlight and said, "What's this fucker's problem?" A stretcher was then brought out, and many shots were administered to me, and I heavily smelt alcohol in the doctors and the ambulance I was brought to. I then used my mind powers to turn them all to me. I then murdered all but one of them, and their spirits started flying around me. I then said to myself, yes, a perfect world of you. Everything will be you. You're the smartest, sexiest, most awesomest person on this planet. It should be after you. You are perfection. We should make love. I then created a whole world with my powers. I was then brought through weird hospital halls immediately on the stretcher. Then evil doctors were trying to experiment on me because I was perfection. Then one of the nurses said, this part being true, we only need a little pee, just this much. I thought I was suddenly in a porno and was confused. I wasn't able to grasp my mind around this, and when I was left alone to pee in the container, I just sat there staring at it. They came back in and asked me if I had, and said I didn't have to. They then suddenly turned evil and said, okay, we have to now. They then inserted a catheter. I screamed louder than anything. I then kept asking my mom if I could go to bed, because I'd been trained to do that if I was under pressure from an adult while on drugs. After a while, I realized where I was. After my heart rate went down, I was released. Conclusion: this was not what I wanted. I woke up in the hospital, scared, confused, and pissed off. I had to have a catheter put in and taken out, and now I've lost all my privileges. My mom doesn't trust me at all. I had the worst experience and now realize how self-absorbed I actually am. I never believed it to be a problem before, but I realize how much of an asshole I am, and life is just starting to become too much. I can barely enjoy things anymore because this trip is always on my mind. If you are offered 25I NBOME, you should stay away. It's just bad news. I also know about 3 people who had seizures on this stuff. Another completely lost his shit and was put in a mental ward for 72 hours. Please, if you don't heed my warning, at least be careful. I'm sorry for how hard this may be to understand. I barely understand it myself. I believe this stuff has fucked me up for the rest of my life. Maybe not physically, but spiritually. Friday the 18th of September 2015, I found myself in a hospital bed in the emergency wing, hooked up to an IV to detoxify my blood. That took about 8 hours. I took Hawaiian baby Woodrose. I started at around 10:30 p.m. I scraped the husk off carefully from 5 seeds and crushed them in my mouth and let my saliva work at it. Around midnight, I had expected a trip within 30 to 60 minutes. I just felt really cramped and sick. I walked back home with my boyfriend and started to feel jittery, as in when I tried to sit down on the carpet, it was like my legs were jello and I just halfway fall into it. There was a point where it felt too bad and I just went to bed hoping it would pass. But I started twitching uncontrollably and even my speech was altered. After about 2 hours of twitching and it not stopping, my boyfriend called a friend to drive me to the hospital. I had intense mood swings, switching almost every minute, and they had to carry me to the car because moving my hand even was hard. They wheeled me into the hospital and the twitches had almost stopped, but as soon as the doctors took over, I puked all over 4 times in a row. I instantly felt better. They carried me onto a board, then the bed, and removed my clothes while my boyfriend was registering me. Then they hooked me up to an EKG and did 4 tests throughout the night, I was told, as well as blood tests. My mood swings were still present. They hooked me up to an IV for the night and monitored my heart rate. I came in at about 122 beats per minute. It steadied at around 109 beats per minute until about 10 in the morning, I'm assuming, and I got let out at 10:45. After they had me all hooked up and my boyfriend was allowed to stay with me, the high instantly hit and I was intensely happy. It was really funny because I'd think of something worrying, like is my heart going to stay like that forever? And I'd get all teared up and about to cry, then I'd look over at him and instantly have the biggest smile. That happened for a few hours. Finally, we fell asleep and I left in the morning after a saline injection. The doctor told me to get another EKG the following week and come back. I went to the doctor today. I now have first, possibly second-degree heart block. That means the signal for my heart to beat is slowed or disrupted from the upper to the lower chambers. I feel dizzy and faint more often. Further testing tomorrow will tell me what the other heart problem was. The reason I wanted to try it was for the visuals. I didn't hallucinate though. In my opinion, it is not worth it.